Welcome to Silkroad. I've always loved video games and getting pulled into different worlds, but as I've gotten older, I've naturally had less time to play everything I want to play. There are always games I tell myself I'm going to start, and games I probably should have played by now, but somehow, no matter what else came out, Silkroad never completely left. My girlfriend would walk into my room, look at my PC, and somehow Silkroad would be on the screen again. Sometimes I was actually playing, sometimes I was just checking something in town, and sometimes it was, botting in the background, but more on that later. And after returning to it over and over again, I eventually started asking myself a pretty simple question. Why this game? Why Silkroad? Because on paper, Silkroad should be incredibly easy to walk away from. It's grind heavy, it's frustrating, and it can be brutally harsh when it punishes you for a mistake. You can spend hours grinding and barely feel stronger. You can lose days of progress trying to upgrade a single piece of equipment, and many of its systems feel completely outdated by modern standards. And yet, it's also one of the most social, memorable, and strangely addictive MMORPGs I've ever played. So today, I want to do a complete review on Silkroad Online. This isn't just a nostalgia trip or me defending a game because I grew up playing it. I want to separate what Silkroad meant to me from what its core systems actually do well, and then decide whether I could recommend the game to a completely new player today. Because Silkroad exists across official servers, private servers, and several completely different eras, I'm reviewing the core systems that define the game before separately judging what it's actually like to play in 2026. What the game actually does well, what parts have aged badly, why did it become so addictive, and underneath all of the nostalgia, memories, and history, is Silkroad Online genuinely a good MMORPG? At its core, Silkroad is a Korean MMO about grinding monsters, building a character, running trade routes, fighting other players, and upgrading equipment in a world where the people around you genuinely matter. From the outside, it looks simple. Choose a weapon, gain levels, and find better gear. But Silkroad was unforgiving. Progress demanded huge amounts of time, success often depended on the people around you, and nearly every major system carried some sort of risk. The deeper you went, the more those simple systems started overlapping and demanding more from the player. And it all started with one thing: your character. Silkroad has fewer classes than most MMORPGs, but the character you choose carries an unusual amount of weight. Your race, weapon, stats, and skill trees determine what you're good at, how independently you can play, and where you fit into the rest of the game. The system itself isn't overly complicated once someone explains it. The problem is that Silkroad barely explains it at all. Before getting into the builds, it helps to understand that Silkroad's level caps represent different eras of the game. A new cap changes the available skills, mastery combinations, regions, and the entire tier of equipment players are chasing. Silkroad organizes that equipment into degrees, and the visual identity of those degrees matters. Degree 8 is known for its green equipment, Degree 10 for its purple sets, and players usually refer to its gear by its degree instead of its exact level. That means 80 cap Silkroad isn't simply an unfinished version of 110 cap Silkroad. The builds, skills, and equipment are different enough that each cap feels like its own version of the game. Some servers start as low as 40 cap, while others go far beyond 130, so players are choosing more than the length of the grind. They're choosing which version of Silkroad they want to play. Once you choose the cap, the next major decision is your race. Chinese characters aren't locked into a set class like Druid, Paladin, or Shaman. Instead, you build your own class by combining a weapon, elemental masteries, and stat points. You chose between Bishan for blade and sword, Huxil for glaive and spear, or Passion for bow. Then you combine that weapon with fire, cold, lightning, or force, while placing every stat point into strength or intelligence. Strength increases physical damage and survivability, while intelligence increases magical damage and mana. You can fully commit to one stat, or split them to create a hybrid. The elemental masteries then change what that weapon was capable of. Fire increases physical damage, cold adds defense, lightning brings speed, and force can provide healing, resurrection, and debuffs. You don't need to memorize every combination to understand the appeal. The same basic pieces can create characters that feel noticeably different. A full strength bow focuses more heavily on physical attacks, critical damage, and survivability. A full intelligence bow has less health, but it can combine bow skills with powerful magical nukes. They carry the same weapon, but they aren't built for the same purpose or played in the same way. That's what I like most about the Chinese system. Rather than handing you a completed class, Silkroad gives you a small collection of compatible parts and lets you build one around your preferred style of play. The European race approaches character creation from the opposite direction. European characters choose from 6 clearly defined classes: Warrior, Rogue, Wizard, Warlock, Bard, and Cleric. You can develop 2 of those class trees, creating combinations such as Warrior Cleric, Wizard Bard, or Rogue Warlock, and so on. Where Chinese characters are assembled through weapons, elements, and stat distributions, European characters combine two recognizable class roles. A wizard is a fragile magical damage dealer, a warrior is a heavily armored frontline fighter, and bard or cleric gave parties clear support roles. That makes European characters easier to understand, but also more specialized. Chinese characters are usually more flexible and comfortable operating alone, while European characters have clearer jobs and become much stronger when working with other players. That difference is reinforced by how potions work. European characters have around a 15-second cooldown on normal health and mana pots, which makes it much harder for them to sustain themselves alone during an important fight. Players often use HP grains instead. They restore around 12% of your health, but their cooldown is closer to 3 seconds. So surviving becomes a mix of grains, healing skills, and support from the people around you. That limitation gives European classes even more reason to depend on a strong class combination or a properly built party. Choosing Chinese or European changes how you approach most of the game, even though the available classes remain easy to recognize. That matters because there isn't one build that's best at everything. A character built for one-on-one PvP may not be the best choice for a caravan or an organized party, and some of the builds trade damage for defense, mobility, healing, or support. Players aren't only choosing the attacks they think look coolest, they're trying to build a character for the part of Silkroad they care about most. That's why build discussions became so passionate. Players were not only arguing about which class was the strongest, they were defending the character they had spent months learning and developing. The biggest flaw is that Silkroad barely teaches new players how these characters should be built. The most damaging example is the mastery limit. The game lets new Chinese characters begin leveling fire, cold, lightning, force, bow, blade, and glavi at the same time. Early on that feels useful. You gain more abilities, experiment with more weapons, and seem to have more options. What Silkroad doesn't make clear is that every mastery limit consumes part of a fixed total allowance. At 80 cap, Chinese characters have a total mastery of 300 levels. That's enough to fully develop only a few trees. A clueless new player who spreads those points evenly across all 7 masteries can reach level 80 with every tree stuck at around level 43. They end up with dozens of abilities, but almost none of them are strong enough for the content they've reached. And because all 300 mastery levels have already been used, there's no room to improve one tree without removing levels from another first. Correcting the mistake requires paid reset items, or a long process of undoing mastery levels before building the right trees. Masteries aren't the only permanent choice. Strength and intelligence points also aren't freely reversible. A player who wants a full INT character might spend their first few levels putting points into STR before they understand the system. That won't completely ruin the character, but it permanently leaves them with less magical damage and mana than someone who committed every single point to INT. Silkroad asks you to make lasting decisions almost immediately, before you've played enough to understand what you're actually creating. The build system isn't especially complicated. The failure is that the game lets players make permanent mistakes before properly teaching them what those choices mean. Making builds difficult to change isn't entirely negative. Because rebuilding can require substantial time, gold, or paid items, players don't casually switch every time another option becomes slightly stronger. They become attached to the build they chose and used to learn its strengths while working around its weaknesses. You aren't only playing a character, you're playing a force bow, a spear nuker, a warrior clerk, or whichever combination you've spent months developing. That commitment creates real class identity, but it only feels rewarding when the player understands the decision being made. For an experienced player, the cost of changing builds gives the choice meaning. For a new player, it can trap them inside a mistake the game never properly warned them about. That's what defines Silkroad's character creation system. A small set of choices can shape your entire experience, but the game expects new players to understand those choices without properly explaining them. For its strong class identity, meaningful decisions, and simple but flexible design, Silkroad's character builds and class system earns a 4 out of 5. Once you chose your weapon, stats, and masteries, you enter the leveling phase. And this is where we reach one of Silkroad's biggest weaknesses. Leveling takes forever. Private servers can change the rates, but Silkroad always struggles with the same balance. Make progression too fast and reaching the cap feels meaningless. Make it too slow and the game becomes like a second job. On traditional rates, there are only a few real ways to progress. You grind countless monsters yourself, complete tedious quests, or have a stronger player power level you. That's basically it. There isn't an interesting campaign carrying you toward level cap or major story moments breaking up the grind. You mostly kill monsters, then you move somewhere else and kill slightly stronger monsters, and then you do it again. The quests don't make this process much better. I'm not convinced anyone has ever willingly read an entire Silkroad quest box. The translations are often confusing, there's barely any story worth following, and almost every quest is some variation of killing several hundred monsters, collecting hundreds of random drops, or delivering something to another town. The quests are incredibly boring, but they're difficult to ignore because they can reward a large amount of experience. That makes them important to your progression without making them enjoyable to complete. And yet, despite how repetitive leveling is, it can still be strangely satisfying. New regions, stronger monsters, and upgraded skills give each real milestone weight. Character level also isn't the only thing you're managing. You need skill points to upgrade your abilities, and leveling too quickly without earning enough SP can leave your build unfinished. To avoid that, players sometimes keep their mastery below their character level. That slows experience gain while allowing SP to accumulate faster. It adds planning to progression, but it also means leveling efficiently isn't as simple as gaining XP as quickly as possible. Back in the day when somebody leveled too fast and didn't earn enough SP, players simply told them, "You're messed." It's such a random phrase, but I still think about it every time I see an unfinished build. Silkroad also rewards players for leveling together. Larger parties create stronger party monsters with better experience and drops, but the real party system is almost entirely built around the European race. A properly assembled European party rewards players for creating different characters that actually depend on one another. A warrior can lure groups of monsters towards the party and use damage distributing skills to absorb part of the damage their teammates receive. A cleric keeps everyone alive, increases their health, and provides defensive support. Bards restore mana and increase the physical or magical damage of the entire party, while wizards sacrifice survivability for enormous area damage. Wizards can activate buffs that make them even more fragile in exchange for dealing more damage, but that weakness barely matters when a cleric increases its health and a warrior absorbs much of the damage being sent towards it. When every role is filled properly, the party becomes far stronger than the individual characters inside it. That is great cooperative design, but it also exposes one of the biggest problems with the Chinese race. Inside a properly assembled leveling party, there's almost nothing a Chinese character can provide that a European class cannot do better. A wizard deals more area damage, a cleric provides stronger healing and protection, a bard gives the entire party damage, speed, and mana support, while a warrior can control monsters and keep the weaker classes alive. Chinese characters are much better at operating alone, while most European builds become significantly weaker without a party around them. That gives the two races a clear identity, but in organized group progression, Europe completely takes over. Power leveling is extremely common too. A higher level player kills stronger monsters while weaker characters stay nearby collecting experience. Friends may do it for free, while other players charge gold and turn it into a service. Either way, progression once again depends on the people around you. I don't think I've ever taken a character from level 1 to the cap without receiving some form of power leveling. Death also carries an experience penalty, which makes long grinding sessions way more dangerous than they first appear. If you leave your character grinding overnight and the party falls apart, your bot can keep running, dying, and losing experience every time. You can go to sleep expecting progress and wake up a few levels lower than where you started. That means you still have to be conscious of the party you join, because one bad setup can undo hours of leveling while nobody is watching. Pets also became part of the grinding process. Attack pets such as wolves are fun because they grow alongside your character, help attack monsters, and eventually become something you get strangely attached to. But practically, they aren't especially useful. They take a long time to level, usually deal very little damage, cost gold to keep alive, and occasionally get in the way, especially when the pet is something massive like a bear. They're cool, they're nostalgic, and I still like having one beside me, but most of the time they aren't worth the effort required to maintain them. Pick pets are completely different. A monkey, squirrel, or another pick pet automatically collects the gold, equipment, and materials dropped by monsters, allowing you to continue attacking instead of stopping to pick up items after every kill. They also have their own inventory, which gives you more space and lets you separate your drops from the items carried by your character. Once you've played with one, grinding without it feels significantly worse. Of course, the useful pet is also the one tied to the item mall. You normally need silk to purchase it, another paid item every 28 days to keep it active, and additional expansions if you want more inventory space. The pet can usually collect enough valuable items to justify renewing it, but that doesn't change the fact that Silkroad created an extremely useful solution to an annoying problem, and then charged players repeatedly to keep that solution active. The biggest thing breaking up the normal grind is unique hunting. Uniques are powerful world bosses that appear randomly throughout specific regions of the map. Each unique has several possible spawn locations, increased chances of dropping valuable equipment, and enough health that killing one can become an event for everybody in that area. Whoever contributes the most damage receives the kill, and their name is announced across the entire server. That creates an obvious advantage for stronger players, but finding the unique first can make up for a meaningful difference in power. If one happens to spawn directly beside you while you're grinding, you have a huge head start. If your guild or party is organized, everyone can check a different possible spawn location and call the unique the second somebody finds it. And if you're quick enough, you can sometimes lure it away from the expected spawn area before the rest of the server arrives. Suddenly you've taken a public world boss and hidden it somewhere nobody else is checking. A stronger player can still show up and take the kill by dealing more damage, but speed, coordination, and having an entire party searching together give normal players a way to compete. That randomness is what makes unique hunting so fun. You can spend hours grinding normally, and then suddenly Tiger Girl, Cerberus, Captain Ivy, or Lord Yorkin appears nearby and the entire session changes. Players teleport across the map, guild members begin checking spawn points, and everybody is racing to reach the same monster before somebody else takes the kill. It gives Silkroad's otherwise repetitive PvE something spontaneous and competitive. And then there's botting. On traditional rates, reaching the cap manually takes an unreasonable amount of time. I had a level 118 nuker on the official Joymax server Merv, and it took me somewhere between 3 to 4 years to reach that level. That sounds completely insane when I say it out loud, and that's why on traditional raid servers, botting often becomes the practical exception for anyone trying to keep pace with the rest of the server. You can hand grind for a while, but eventually you begin falling behind in levels, gold, and drops. Before long, you aren't only leveling more slowly, you're falling behind in the entire server economy. Bots make that grind manageable by leveling your character, collecting gold, and farming items while you're away from the computer. But they also damage the experience the game is supposedly trying to create. A world full of characters doesn't necessarily mean a world full of players. A crowded grinding area can look active until you realize every character beside you is following a script and nobody is responding in chat. Allowing bots solves the time problem by automating it. It doesn't make the underlying leveling process better. Bot-free servers can feel more alive because every moving character is supposed to be controlled by a real person. But now every player is personally responsible for completing a leveling process designed around an enormous time requirement. That is what makes botting such a strange part of Silkroad's progression. It makes the game more manageable, but it makes the world feel less real. Removing it makes the world feel more authentic, but exposes how repetitive and demanding the leveling process actually is. Neither approach completely fixes the real problem. Silkroad simply asks players to repeat the same progression loop for far too long. Still, reaching the level cap can feel genuinely rewarding. The quests are terrible, the grind is painfully repetitive, and the game often demands far more time than it should. But parties, uniques, pets, and the people around you can create memorable moments inside that repetition. And because progression is slow, every meaningful milestone carries real weight. Finishing a completed build can feel like the end of an actual journey. Silkroad's leveling works because it makes progression feel earned, and struggles because it asks far too much before giving you that feeling. 3 out of 5. Oh, and because I know a lot of you guys are going to ask where I'm currently playing, a massive thank you to the EuroRoad team for inviting me to their private beta. A lot of the gameplay throughout this video was recorded there. It's the very first European-only 40 cap server, with a super old school style, an awesome development team, and perhaps most importantly, no virus when you download it. EuroRoad officially launches on August 21st, so if that sounds like the kind of Silkroad server you've been looking for, definitely check it out. The leveling process is repetitive, but Silkroad at least gives you an interesting world to grind through. As your character gets stronger, you travel farther from your starting city and gradually make your way across a fantasy version of the Silk Road. That historical foundation is one of the coolest things about the game. Silkroad turns the trade routes that connected civilizations across Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe into an MMO built around distant cities, dangerous travel, and regions inspired by real cultures. It isn't historically accurate. Different time periods, civilizations, mythology, and fantasy creatures are all thrown into the same world, but the inspiration is obvious. Constantinople has its own version of the Hagia Sophia, Alexandria includes the enormous Lighthouse of Alexandria, and Samarkand domes, tiled buildings, and open spaces clearly resemble places like Registan Square. Silkroad doesn't recreate those locations perfectly, it uses them to build a fantasy journey through human history. That identity continues across the entire map. Jianggang feels green and welcoming, Danwang feels dry and isolated, Hotan feels like a distant desert trading city, and Constantinople immediately feels more European. The architecture, terrain, monsters, color palette, and music all change as you move between civilizations. Even with blurry textures and simple geometry, you can usually recognize a city or region immediately. That makes each area feel like another stage of a journey instead of another copy-pasted leveling zone. The world also communicates progression through danger. As you move farther away from each city, the monsters become stronger, and the first trip through a new region can be stressful when you don't know which enemies are aggressive. Usually the main reason a weak character is running through one of those areas is because somebody stronger has offered to power level them. You can teleport most of the way there, but there's almost always one final stretch where a monster starts to chase you. They can only follow you for a short distance, but they're often faster than you. So once one catches up, there's a good chance you're going to get absolutely wrecked before it decides to turn around. Once you learn the aggressive monsters and teleport routes, most of that tension disappears, and that reveals one of the world's main weaknesses. Most areas are ultimately large hunting grounds rather than places filled with secrets or meaningful discoveries. The world is memorable because of where it takes you, not necessarily what you find there. Later versions did add more structured PvE through Forgotten World. Forgotten World is a collection of instanced dungeons split across different level ranges and difficulty grades. Higher grades replace normal monsters with stronger versions and increase both the rewards and coordination required. The main reason players enter is to collect talismans. Completing a full collection can reward extremely rare weapons, large amounts of skill points, or other valuable items depending on the dungeon and version of the game. That makes Forgotten World incredibly rewarding, especially when the final item would otherwise be almost impossible to obtain, but the layouts and enemies barely change. Difficult runs can take 1 or 2 hours, and players may need to repeat the same dungeon again and again while waiting for the one talisman that refuses to drop. Forgotten World gives Silkroad a structured alternative to normal grinding and some of its best long-term rewards, but it stretches that good idea through so much repetition that players can eventually become sick of it. The Silkroad map is also more directed than it first appears. Mountains, rivers, bridges, and narrow crossings funnel players into the same routes. That limits free exploration, but it gives those roads a real purpose. On an active server, traders, hunters, thieves, and grinding parties keep crossing paths in the same places. Silkroad's roads restrict the player, but they also make the world feel shared, and visually, there's no avoiding it. Silkroad looks ancient, the textures are painfully low resolution, the environments rely on repeated objects, and the collision can leave you stuck in scenery that barely looks like it should be there. It doesn't just look outdated, it often feels feels stiff and unfinished, but the art direction underneath those technical problems is still recognizable, and even the blurry old look has become part of Silkroad's identity. I've seen modern recreations that look far clearer, but a remaster could easily improve the graphics while somehow feeling less like Silkroad. And one of the biggest reasons those old environments remain so memorable is the soundtrack. Silkroad's music is nostalgic, emotional, and immediately recognizable. Every region has music that fits its atmosphere. Some areas feel peaceful and welcoming, while others sound lonely, mysterious, or adventurous. Even after years away from the game, one track can instantly remind you of a specific town or leveling area. The strange part is that Silkroad doesn't have a huge soundtrack. The music rarely reacts to combat, and you may hear the same short loop for hours before moving into another region. But that repetition is probably part of why it became so iconic. Each place gets permanently attached to one specific sound. You don't just remember what Samarkand, Jiangyan, or Constantinople looks like. You remember exactly what it sounds like. Technically, Silkroad's world has aged terribly. The exploration is shallow, the graphics are rough, and the soundtrack is limited. But as a place with identity, history, and atmosphere, it's still incredibly memorable. The identity outweighs a lot of the outdated execution, so Silkroad's world design, exploration, and soundtrack earns a 4 out of 5. As you move through Silk Road, the cities and monsters change, and so does your character. Every degree introduces another visually distinct set of weapons and armor, so progression isn't only something you see in your level. Silk Road's equipment doesn't feel like the same item with slightly higher numbers and a different color. Every degree has a recognizable design, and after playing long enough, you can look at another character and roughly understand their level, build, and possibly how much real money they've spent without even talking to them. And personally, Degree 8 is still my favorite equipment set in the game. That's partly because the era is iconic, but the weapons also go crazy. I mean, come on, look at that D8 bow. Absolute masterpiece. Armor isn't only cosmetic either. Across both races, armor broadly falls into physical, magical, and balanced defensive options. Heavy armor protects better against physical damage, garment or robe protects better against magic and adds movement bonuses, while protector and light armor sit between the two. The choice still matters because the best set depends on the opponents and builds around you. Although garment's movement speed choice is so useful that Chinese armor choice can feel less balanced than it first appears. Chinese characters can freely choose among their 3 armor types, while European armor is tied directly to class selection. That adds depth, but it also makes a poorly planned class combination more punishing. Choosing the correct armor type is only the beginning. Actually building a finished set in Silk Road can feel like an entire project. Every item starts with random base values, and then you can improve it with blue bonuses such as STR, INT, HP, MP, attack rate, or parry rate. That means 2 players can use the same weapon at the same enchantment level and still perform differently. A weapon with stronger base values, better blue stats, and higher reinforcement can quietly outperform another item that looks almost identical from a distance. That makes optimization rewarding, because knowledgeable players can find value other people overlook. But it also makes finishing a set far more tedious than the simple equipment screen first suggests. The casual player sees a +7 weapon, the serious player inspects every number underneath it. Across a weapon, shield, 6 armor pieces, and 4 accessories, there's always another percentage, blue stat, or enchantment level that could be improved. Obtaining the correct item doesn't mean the item is finished. It means the project has started. All of that equipment feeds into a player-controlled market. In the original system, selling an item meant opening a stall in town and dedicating your entire character to it. Once the stall was open, you couldn't grind, trade, or do anything else. Your character sat there displaying equipment while other players walked through town comparing prices and trying to negotiate. It sounds inconvenient, and it absolutely was, but it also made the server feel incredibly alive. Jiangyan, Samarkand, and Hotan could be filled with hundreds of characters advertising weapons, elixirs, seal equipment, materials, and random items they believed were worth far more than anybody was willing to pay. Buying an item often involved messaging the seller, making an offer, and arguing over the price until somebody finally gave in. Later versions and many private servers introduced consignment systems that allow players to list items through an NPC. This is much more convenient, but it still keeps part of the live market feeling. You can see who listed the item and try to message them with the lower offer, but if they're offline, you either pay the listed price, or you wait for them to return, risking someone else buying it. Consignment also gives players a limited number of listings, so anyone selling a large collection of items may still need to open a traditional stall. It isn't the most advanced economy system, but the visible stalls, constant negotiation, and endless search for underpriced equipment make trading feel like another activity instead of a menu you open up occasionally. Botting also fed directly into the market, and the effect was both good and bad. Gold bots flooded the economy with gold, elixirs, and equipment, but they also supplied players who didn't want to complete the entire grind themselves. Somebody was still managing the bots, keeping them running and collecting what they farmed, while another player could spend real money to buy the result. There was a strange balance to it. One person turned the work of operating a bot farm into income, while another paid to skip the part of Silk Road they didn't have the time or patience to complete. It will still pay to win, and it damaged the legitimacy of progression, but it also became a major part of how the economy actually functioned. Then you've got Seal of Star, Seal of Moon, and Seal of Sun. These rarer and stronger items often represent the real endgame. Steel weapons have a distinctive glow, so exceptional gear is immediately recognizable and carries a level of prestige most MMOs struggle to create. The best items become famous across the entire server. Players remember who owns the strongest weapon, who made the first high plus seal item, and who is standing in town with the glow nobody else can match. Gear isn't only a source of stats, it becomes a visible status symbol and part of the server's history, but their scarcity also creates enormous power gaps and makes progression heavily dependent on wealth, timing, and luck. When the item you want is out of reach, your other option is improving what you already have, and this is where Alchemy comes in. Alchemy is the process of risking your item's current plus and your own sanity for the chance to make it marginally stronger. You combine an item with an elixir and lucky powder, press the button and hope. If it succeeds, the plus increases, the item becomes stronger, and the glow gets brighter. If it fails, the plus can reset, durability can be permanently damaged, or at higher levels, the item can be destroyed without protection. Silkroad offers a separate protection for almost every punishment. Lucky improves your odds, Steady protects the durability, Immortal prevents destruction, and Astral limits how far certain failures can knock the plus back down. Because the odds feel so unclear, players convince themselves that certain towns, NPCs, or clicking rituals are lucky than others, even though that's mostly in their heads. Some players wait between attempts, move to another Alchemy NPC, or build an entire ritual around the button, because accepting that the result is random somehow feels worse. That uncertainty is frustrating, but it's also why every serious plus attempt creates so much tension. And this is where Alchemy's biggest problem becomes so impossible to ignore. This is the point where Silkroad turns real money into equipment power. Success is random, but your ability to keep attempting depends on how much money you can afford to lose. Money buys more attempts, more materials, finished gear from other players, and protection from the punishments built into the system. The richest players aren't guaranteed to succeed on any single attempt. They are simply able to keep attempting until they do. Alchemy also isn't Silkroad's only form of gambling. Magic Pop lets players purchase cards through the item mall. Choose a prize they want and spend the card for a random chance of actually receiving it. Depending on the version of Silkroad, the available rewards can include cosmetic outfits, items with small stat bonuses, Devil Spirit equipment, and even extremely powerful seal weapons. It's an annoying system because the player isn't buying the item. They're buying another attempt at winning it. Magic Pop takes the same excitement created by rare drops in Alchemy, connects it directly to real money, and becomes one more gambling system inside a game already filled with them. Sometimes you grind for your gear inside Silkroad, sometimes you grind for it at your actual job. High plus weapons glow brighter, attract attention in town, and advertise power, wealth, luck, and possibly several questionable financial decisions. So you aren't only chasing extra damage, you're chasing the glow, the reputation, and the opportunity to stand around town flexing on the Silkroad babes. That's why Alchemy is simultaneously one of Silkroad's best and worst systems. Every click creates real tension, success feels incredible, and finished items can turn players and weapons into server legends. But the system is stressful, tedious, and heavily controlled by randomness, while the item mall sells protection from the punishment it creates. Silkroad understands how to make equipment feel valuable better than almost any MMO I've ever played, but it also uses that attachment against the player. It made certain players into legends, and money was often one of the reasons. Gear progression in Alchemy earns a 3 out of 5. Combat is one of Silkroad's strongest systems. You build your character, unlock stronger skills, and improve your equipment so you can grind faster, compete for uniques, and eventually fight other players. The combat is old school, repetitive, and mechanically simple, but it's also consistently fun. Silkroad uses a point and click system. You select a target, press a skill, and your character performs the attack automatically. There's no manual aiming or active dodging, and most builds rely on a relatively small group of attacks. You'll press the same skill thousands of times, but those skills feel good to press. The attacks have weight, the animations are epic, and your character's power is easy to notice. Grinding tests how efficiently you can kill, PvP forces you to use those same skills differently and actually understand what they do. Silkroad isn't testing your aim or asking you to manage 20 attacks at once. Its depth comes from timing, positioning, and reading the fight. You need to control distance, know when to push, and recognize when a long animation will leave you exposed. You're watching your opponent's movements, estimating their health, and reacting to stuns, knockdowns, knockbacks, and debuffs. Understanding the build in front of you matters just as much as understanding your own, because its range, strongest attacks, and available buffs can completely change the matchup. The basics are easy to understand, but using them consistently while another player is trying to kill you is honestly pretty difficult. Silkroad punishes mistakes immediately. Commit to the wrong attack and your opponent gets a free opening. Let a bow or wizard create too much distance and you may never get close again. Fixed rotations work against weaker players, but at a higher level, every block, status effect, and change in distance can change what you should do next. A knockback may buy time, while a debuff can create the opening for your strongest attack. The buttons themselves are simple. Knowing which one the fight needs next is where the skill comes from. Weapon switching pushes that even further. Warriors can move between sword and shield, two-handed sword, and dual axes depending on what the situation needs. A rogue cleric can switch to their cleric rod for healing or defense before returning to its offensive weapon. At the very high end, players even switch to a shield during the gaps between attack animations, then switch back when they're ready to attack again. That creates another chance to block incoming damage, but doing it consistently takes precise timing and a real understanding of the game's animations. Once you start noticing those small decisions, the combat becomes much more technical than the basic point and click system suggests. But even before you understand any of that, the skills themselves are a huge point of why Silkroad's combat is so fun. Ghost Spear swings the Glavier around the character in a huge circle, knocking people back and dealing massive criticals. Strongbow builds up before releasing one enormous shot. Prick is one of the most recognizable one-shot skills in the game, while the Fire Meteor nuke creates exactly the explosion you'd expect from powerful magic. Certain skills just have aura. You know what's happening as soon as the animation begins, and the strongest attacks genuinely feel dangerous. That identity keeps them satisfying, even after you've watched them thousands of times. Silkroad also gets skill progression right. A level 30 nuke already looks powerful. Later versions become larger, more dramatic, and clearly more dangerous. By the time you reach the high level version, it feels like a real upgrade instead of the same attack with a bigger number attached. New skills are exciting because the increase in power is something you can actually see. Silkroad also has Berserk mode. Your character randomly gains red Berserk points. Once all 5 points are filled, you can activate Berserk and temporarily become faster, stronger, and significantly more badass. It typically lasts for around a minute, so players save it for strong monsters, difficult party mobs, unique hunting, or simply running somewhere faster when they don't feel like buying a horse. It's a basic power mode, but it fits Silkroad perfectly. Activating Berserk against a unique or in the middle of a close fight immediately makes the moment feel more important. Group PvP takes everything good about the combat and turns up the intensity. Attacks start flying from both sides, players drop, buffs go off, and the fight becomes chaotic within seconds. A coordinated group can beat stronger individuals, and one good target call or perfectly timed stun can completely turn a group fight. The chaos also rewards awareness in a different way from a duel. You need to know who your group is focusing, which teammate is in danger, and when chasing one weak player is pulling you away from the actual objective. Traditional Chinese only fights are especially fun, because they're fast, aggressive, and rarely stop moving. Silkroad also has smaller PvP events outside Job Wars and Fortress War. Capture the Flag is mostly dead now, which is unfortunate because back in the day it was one of Silkroad's best events. Players within similar level ranges are divided into 2 teams for a short fight over a flag, with kills and victories awarding tickets that can be exchanged for useful rewards. Back when Silkroad was newer and nobody had fully optimized every class, low-level Capture the Flag could be complete chaos. Half of the players barely understood their builds, equipment differences weren't always enormous, and normal low-level characters were still willing to enter just to see what happened. Some of my favorite old Silkroad videos are Spicy Mustard's Capture the Flag videos, because they capture exactly what the event used to feel like. It wasn't perfectly balanced or especially serious. It was a group of players fighting over a flag before everybody had solved the entire game. Today, the rewards are often no longer valuable enough, and the mode needs enough players within the same level range to create 2 reasonably balanced teams. Without that population, it either doesn't start or becomes so uneven that it isn't even worth playing. That's a shame because when the population and rewards are right, Capture the Flag is one of Silkroad's most accessible and consistently entertaining PvP events. The traditional Silkroad balance started falling apart once the European party synergies entered PvP. The same specialization that makes European leveling parties so efficient becomes even more oppressive when it's used against other players. Once warriors, clerics, bards, and damage classes are assembled correctly, the party can cover almost every weakness internally, while Chinese characters have very little comparable support to offer. The teamwork can be incredible, but fully supported parties can also create fights where everybody is attacking and health bars barely move. The same design that creates some of Silkroad's strongest cooperation also creates some of its worst balancing problems. Individual build balance has problems too. Bishan is one of the clearest examples. Outside of 1 vs 1 PvP, it has been left behind at almost every single cap, often offering less damage and less group value than the alternatives. The exact meta changes with the cap and server, but Silkroad regularly leaves certain builds behind for entire eras of the game. Equipment and randomness also carry directly into PvP. Better gear can cover up for a lot of mistakes, while a block, critical hit, or failed debuff can completely change a close fight. That unpredictability keeps combat exciting, but it also means the better players won't always win. Silkroad isn't balanced enough to function as a serious competitive PvP game. Party composition, build choice, equipment, and luck can all decide too much before individual skill gets a chance. But combat is still one of the best parts of the game. The controls are simple, the attacks feel great, and there's enough depth to reward players who truly master their build. It misses the perfect score because the balancing is horrible, but when the balance stays out of the way, pushing your favorite build through a close fight is still one of the best experiences Silkroad has to offer. The iconic animations, intense fights, and surprisingly strong skill ceiling earn Silkroad's combat and PvP a 4 out of 5. The job system is Silkroad at its absolute best. If you want to understand why players still talk about this game years later, this is the system to look at. It brings the world, economy, PvP, and social side of Silkroad together better than anything else the game does. In its original form, the system is built around 3 roles: trader, hunter, and thief. A trader buys goods in one city and tries to move them to another for profit. A hunter protects the caravan, and a thief tries to take it. The reason it works is that every role naturally wants something different. Someone is carrying value, someone is protecting it, and someone else wants to steal it. Silkroad doesn't need a queue, battleground, or perfectly balanced instance to force those players into conflict. They fight because each role has a reason to clash with the others. That's an incredible MMO concept, and it still feels strange that more games haven't fully copied it. Traders are the backbone of the whole system. Without enough traders, hunters have nobody to protect and thieves have nobody to rob. You aren't accepting a safe quest and then following a marker across the map. You're spending your own gold on goods, loading that money onto a transport pet and walking it through the open world. If you make it to the next city, you can sell and take a profit, or you can keep going for a larger reward and risk the entire run. That one choice gives the trade tension because you're deciding how much danger you're willing to accept. A short run can be a safe way to make some gold, a longer caravan can pay much more, but every extra road and city gives thieves another chance to find you. The game doesn't need a complicated difficulty menu. The player creates the difficulty by deciding how much value to carry and how far to push it. The amount of gold also determines the trade star level. Some servers use safe 1-star trades, where real thieves cannot attack the trader. That gives newer players a way to learn the route without immediately being destroyed. At the other end, players commonly say they're doing a 5-star when they mean the most difficult and profitable version of a trade. The higher the star level, the more NPC thieves spawn, the more chaos the hunters have to control, and the more profit the caravan can earn if it survives. So the difficulty isn't only created by how far you travel, it's also created by how much value you choose to carry. Trader also gives weaker or newer players a way into the system. You may not have the best gear, but you can join a caravan, follow stronger players, learn the routes, and slowly build up gold while contributing to something larger than yourself. The trader brings value. Stronger players now have a reason to protect them. That's exactly the kind of social dependency an MMO should create. The job system also makes the world feel alive because any caravan you see is an opportunity. You can be grinding and then spot some noob trader trying to make it back to town and immediately think, I can rob this guy. So you teleport back, put your thief suit on, and try to catch him before he reaches safety. That sounds awful, but it proves why the system works. The trader isn't background scenery. The moment somebody carries real value through the world, other players have a reason to react. The hunter role is where strength becomes trust. Traders need protection because losing a run can be expensive, and hunters receive a share when the trade succeeds. A strong and reliable hunter builds a name because people trust them to keep the caravan alive. But the payment still depends partly on the players respecting the arrangement. Hunters receive their share automatically by being close to the traders when they sell their goods in town. If the hunter is far away, or the trader isn't in a party, the hunter won't receive any share of the profits. Some traders try to follow a protected caravan without properly sharing the profit, and hunters notice that. If somebody keeps using everyone else's protection without paying their share, people remember. Hunters may refuse to help them later, or quietly invite a thief to kill them before they reach town. It's basically hiring an assassin. The thief gets a free robbery, the hunter removes somebody abusing the group, and suddenly it's a win-win for everyone except the trader getting murdered on the road. It sounds toxic, but it shows how reputation, greed, and revenge enforce a social contract the game itself never properly controls. Then you have Thief, which is probably the most fun role if you're strong enough to pull it off. Thief is clearly the villain side of the system. You're not helping anybody. You're showing up to ruin someone's night and profit from the risk they took. But without thieves, trading becomes a walking simulator. Thief is usually less reliable as income because you only make money when there's a good caravan to hit, but you also aren't putting up the same upfront gold on the line. The trader risks money, the thief mostly risks time and pride. Trader is profit, hunter is protection, thief is violence. That simple triangle is why the system works. Silkroad also doesn't protect players from unfair job wars. There's no matchmaking, fixed team size, or instance trying to make both sides equal. If 5 thieves attack a huge caravan and get destroyed, that's what happens. If 30 thieves show up and wipe everybody, life is unfair, and so is Silkroad. That unfairness creates strategy, because weakness is a problem the players have to solve. A weak trader isn't expected to beat a max level thief in a fair duel. The answer is to build a caravan, hire protection, change the route, or become socially connected enough that stronger people want to help. Silkroad turns being weaker into a reason to depend on the community instead of pretending every character should be equally safe. The intended risk is what gives the system meaning, but there's an important difference between feeling vulnerable and feeling like participation is completely pointless. A powerful player attacking a weak caravan is part of the system. One side becoming so dominant that nobody else bothers trading anymore is the system starting to break. When it works, job wars create the best PvP in Silkroad because the fight has an objective beyond killing another player. You're trying to keep a transport alive, control the road, and decide whether the caravan can still reach safety while real time and real gold are on the line. Getting robbed doesn't feel like losing a duel. It feels like somebody wasted your time, took your money, and ruined the entire run. And if the thief is somebody you know, it's even worse. You can grind together, talk in town, and party with somebody, but the second you're on the road as a trader, they can put on a thief suit and rob you. That's honestly one of the greatest betrayals in life. That's why so many Silkroad memories come from this system. People remember getting destroyed on a camel, losing a trade seconds before reaching town, or watching a normal caravan turn into a massive server fight. Those moments weren't scripted. They happened because players were moving something valuable through a shared world. The same route could be peaceful one night and turn into a full server war the next. That unpredictability gave ordinary roads and city gates stories that players remembered for years. I could talk about the job system all day, because it really is that good. This is where your build, gear, PvP knowledge, reputation, and gold all matter at the same time. You aren't fighting just to win a duel. You're using the character you built against other players with an actual objective, while the economy and your own money are on the line. That's Silkroad in full swing. Later versions reworked the system and removed the original trader role, but the replacement never recreated the same relationship between the player carrying value, the player protecting it, it and the player trying to steal it. So this rating is specifically for the original triangular job system. Bots, inflation, gear gaps, and pay to win can absolutely damage job wars, but the system is great despite those problems, not because of them. When those outside issues stay out of the way, this simple triangle creates better open world content than most games can build with far more complicated systems. It can be unfair, brutal, and miserable when you're weak or alone, but that risk is exactly why success matters. For me, this is still the easiest rating in the entire review. There's nothing else in Silkroad that represents the game better. The original job system gets a 5 out of 5. The job system creates spontaneous relationships, but guilds are what turn those relationships into a lasting identity. Technically, you can play a lot of Silkroad alone. You can grind, repair your gear, and repeat the same routine by yourself, but solo is the weaker version of the game. A good party makes progression easier, while a good guild gives you a place in the server and changes who you play with, who you help, who helps you, and how other people see you. The chat system supports that really well. The various chat methods keep recruitment, trading, unique calls, scam warnings, and trash talk moving across the server even when players are just standing in town. That consistent noise creates real server culture. Names stick, reputations follow people, and your guild becomes part of your identity. Joining a respected guild gives you some of that respect. Joining a hated guild means you inherit some of that baggage too. If your guild is known for scammers or annoying players, people may judge you before you even type. Players group around language, playstyle, and shared goals, and over time the server learns what each guild represents. Guild leaders matter too, and certain guild masters genuinely have aura because they can recruit good players, keep people active, and make the guild show up when it matters. Unions take those relationships and turn them into server politics. Once several guilds start working together, alliances become large enough to shape who controls major events and who the rest of the server sees as the group to beat. The organized power matters most during Fortress War. Fortress War is the weekly event where guilds and unions have to prove how strong and organized they actually are. The system is easy to understand. One guild owns the fortress, and everybody else is trying to take it. Attackers break through the gates, destroy the towers, and push into the heart room and try to destroy the heart so they can take control. Fortress War runs on a fixed timer, and whichever guild controls the fortress when the timer expires owns it until the next war. Taking it too early can be a mistake because another guild still has time to push in and steal it from you. So the war becomes a pressure game. You need to break through and put yourself in a position to win without doing all the work for somebody else to clean up in the end. One bad call can ruin the war, while one good push at the right time can win the entire week. Even when the whole union helps win, only one guild appears on the map, so powerful alliances sometimes rotate who gets to hold it. Owning the fortress also comes with money. When players buy pots, use NPCs, or run trades in that region, part of the activity funds the fortress owner. The winner doesn't only get bragging rights, they start collecting value from the server itself. And if you're on the losing side, it feels brutal knowing that some of the gold you spend in town is helping the same guild you're trying to beat next week. That pressure is why Fortress War becomes more than a single event. The whole week builds toward it. Players improve gear, stock up on supplies, and make sure the right people are online. Even half inactive members show up because nobody wants to miss the one fight the entire server is paying attention to. A dominant union can absolutely get so far ahead that everybody expects them to keep winning, and the tax money can help them stay strong. But that also makes finally beating them feel like a real achievement. You aren't winning a random battleground, you're taking organized power and part of the server economy away from the group that controlled it. That's why guilds, unions, and Fortress War matter so much. Your guild gives you an identity, your union turns that identity into political power, and Fortress War tests whether all of that organization actually works. The social side of Silkroad is something a lot of MMOs wish they had, and Fortress War is the clearest example of it. The system is simple, but it's intense enough that the guilds recruit for it, unions strategize around it, and the entire server cares who wins. It's organized, political, and server defining in a way very few MMOs can actually match. For guilds, unions, and Fortress War, Silkroad is an easy 4 out of 5. So after all of that, what's Silkroad Online actually like to play in 2026? Honestly, it's a very mixed experience. Silkroad is still alive, and the core of the game is still recognizable, but the current experience isn't easy to recommend to somebody looking to pick it up. Official servers are the hardest part to defend. The experience is weighed down by login queues, gold bots, heavy pay to win, VIP systems, and management that still feels disconnected from what players actually want. That's especially damaging in a game that already asks you to spend so much time building a character and catching up to stronger players. When the official version adds paid access and major power advantages on top of that grind, it makes an already demanding game feel even less fair. Paid items don't automatically ruin an MMO, but spending more money shouldn't let somebody become massively stronger than a player who actually invested the time. That's what makes official Silkroad so frustrating. It still continues enough of the original game to make you care, but it fails to protect the original Silkroad idea well enough to feel like the best place to experience it. For most players, the real energy in 2026 is in private servers. They're messy too, but people go in there because they're trying to find a version of Silkroad that feels closer to the game they remember. A good launch brings back active towns, a fresh economy, meaningful guild competition, and the feeling that everybody is starting from nothing together. For a few weeks, even ordinary drops matter. Guild recruitment feels important, and a player can become known simply by being active and useful. That temporary openness is a huge part of why people keep jumping from one launch to another. That fresh start matters because nobody has completely pulled away yet. Regular players still feel like they can build a reputation, join a strong guild, and maybe become important on the server. The problem is that a lot of private servers follow the same cycle. The launch feels exciting, the towns are full, and for a while it feels like this might be the server that lasts. Then bots appear, whales pull ahead, balance problems show up, guilds quit, and everybody starts looking for the next fresh start. Finding the right amount of customization is difficult too. A server can't be too slow or people get tired. It can't be too fast or nothing feels earned. Keep it too original and all of the old problems come back. Customize it too much and the nostalgia disappears. Better rates, events, balance, and quality of life changes can make Silkroad much easier to live with. But the server still has to know when to stop. Once the towns are covered in custom wings, strange weapon designs, and endless new currencies, it may be polished, but it stops feeling like the game people return for. That's why every server turns into a debate over what real Silkroad is supposed to be. Some players think the original 80 cap era is the best version of the game. Others want the newest level 140 or 150 caps with all of the modern skills, equipment, and designs. Both groups are technically looking for Silkroad, but they may be looking for completely different games. Even after you find a server, there aren't many complete guides online, and the ones that do exist are often outdated or written for a different cap or server. Most players either need somebody experienced to explain the systems, or a lot of patience to learn through trial and error. That's especially difficult in a game where the wrong mastery, stat, or equipment decision can follow your character for a long time. The lack of accessible information makes Silkroad much easier to return to than it is to discover for the first time. So even though Silkroad is still active, the community is scattered across official servers, private servers, regional communities, discords, and whichever new launch people are excited about that month. If you only look at official servers, it looks like a game that's been badly handled for years. If you only look at private servers, it looks like a passionate community with no stable home. That fragmentation is one of the biggest problems with playing the game today. A healthy community still exists, but it's divided into smaller groups that rarely agree on which server, cap, or rule set deserves to become the permanent home. Nostalgia is obviously part of why people keep returning. The login screen, janging music, glowing weapons, and old guild memories still hit immediately. But nostalgia alone doesn't keep a server active. The core systems still need the right conditions around them. And when those conditions are right, Silkroad still has a great rhythm. The grind can be relaxing because the game doesn't demand constant attention every second. You can farm, talk in chat, or watch something on another screen while slowly working on your character. Then a unique spawns, a job fight starts, a rival guild shows up, or a trade run gets attacked, and a simple grind session suddenly turns into PvP or drama. That switch between slow progression and unexpected player conflict is still one of the best parts of actually playing Silkroad. But finding a server where all of that works is difficult. You're looking for something active but not over customized, improved but still recognizable, fair enough to enjoy, and grindy enough for progress to matter. Most of the time, the modern experience is messy, fragmented, and inconsistent. Every once in a while, you find a server where the towns are active, the jobs are moving, and the guilds genuinely care, and the original design starts shining through again. The core game is still strong enough to create amazing moments, but the official version doesn't protect that foundation, and the private server scene is too unstable to make the overall experience easy to recommend. For playing Silkroad Online in 2026, I'd give it a 2 out of 5. So after reviewing everything Silkroad Online has to offer, the final score comes to 29 out of 40, which works out to 7.25 out of 10. Character building gets a 4 out of 5, leveling and progression gets a 3, the world, exploration, and soundtrack get a 4, gear progression and alchemy gets a 3, combat and PvP gets a 4, the job system gets a perfect 5, guilds, unions, and fortress war gets a 4, while the experience of actually playing Silkroad in 2026 gets a 2. Looking at those scores together, the result makes sense. At its best, Silkroad gives players real freedom over how they build and use their character. The mastery system creates distinct builds, the combat is easy to understand without feeling shallow, and PvP gives all of those decisions a purpose. The job system takes that even further by placing character progression, PvP, and the economy into one competitive system where players have something meaningful to gain or lose. Guilds, unions, and fortress war then give the entire server larger reasons to organize and compete. That is Silkroad at its strongest. Leveling improves your build affects PvP, PvP affects job activity, and it all feeds back into the economy and social side of the server. The individual mechanics are fairly simple, but the way they connect makes the overall game feel much deeper than it first appears. But those systems are surrounded by progression and monetization that constantly work against them. Leveling is extremely repetitive, the quests add very little, alchemy can be incredibly punishing, and a large enough equipment advantage can overpower a meaningful difference in skill. When aggressive pay to win is added to a game that already asks for an enormous time investment, progress starts feeling less like a reward for playing well and more like a question of who can grind longer, spend more money, or find the most efficient way around the game's limitations. A 7.25 may sound high for a game I'm struggling to recommend, but that tension is the entire point of the review. The score reflects how good Silkroad can be when its systems are allowed to work together. The recommendation reflects how difficult it is to find that version of the game today. For a completely new player, Silkroad is difficult to recommend. The game is dated, repetitive, and poorly explained, and a new player has to push through all of that before its best systems begin working together. For a returning player, the answer is different. On the right server, Silkroad can be extremely fun because you already understand what the grind is building toward, why the job system matters, and which parts of the experience are worth tolerating. Silkroad is a deeply flawed game with several outstanding ideas. It's not an easy game to recommend in 2026, but when its strongest systems are working together, it's still easy to understand why so many players fell in love with Silkroad, and why even after all of these years, they keep coming back to scratch that Silkroad itch.